I'm now at section 4 of the second lecture on Trumbo, which is called Recreation of Life. And we are hearing from the cat. She cannot be satisfied. All right, the one woman who is off camera really the most, unlike Karine, let's say, and the nurse, who's very real, is Joe's mother. And we really don't ever get a clear picture of her. We get a much clearer picture of the father, but not particularly of the mother. But motherhood comes up, oh boy, it sure does. And so here we have this thing that's reduced to essentially a fetus, or is infantilized. And on page 80, here's this incredibly violent image, right? It was like a full-grown man suddenly being stuffed back into his mother's body. He was lying in stillness. He was completely helpless. Now, as you know, Freud has this sort of creation that he calls the Unheimlich, which is the eerie, the foreign, the alien, the not the forbidden quite, but it's just the dark. It's the darkness, basically. This is what happens to Luke when he goes in. I always see this in Star Wars terms because it's so goofy. You know, when Luke has to go into the tree, and he's, you know, and he has the vision of he kills Vader and he cuts off his face and he sees his head and he sees his own face, you know, and Yoda's like, oh, strong with the Force. That place is okay, whatever. But this is, for me, is like, yeah, that's, I think, George Lucas' concept of the uncanny, the unheimlich. But it's really the male. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's the male view of the female body from a sort of just flat out phobic point of view. It's like, oh my God, you know, what is this vagina? What is this menstruation thing that happens? What is that? You know, instead of just going, look, this is just very basic biological process. But no. We've got to, men have got to fetishize essentially menstruation and make it into this terrible, horrible thing that happens. Oh, Christ. So we could say that, you know, if you want to put it this way, and you could, that essentially Joe is forced back into the womb in the first part of the novel, and in the second part he actually is reborn, and there is a rebirth, and this is something which he is, as he says, he's on the trail of on 136. He had come on the trail of something so precious and so exciting that it was almost like being born all over again into the world. And then that is actually what happens. And he resets his moral compass in his mind and his heart, in whatever parts of him that were left. He was singing. It was dawn, right, on 137. So here he is recreating the world, but this time he gives birth to himself. Now, this is such a strange idea. And in some ways, it's the sort of male... It is an ultimate male fantasy, and this is, I think, a lot of what is going on in Dr. Strangelove, which is that this is sort of what people said after the bomb. And actually, Oppenheimer said something like this, not quite, but he said something like it, which is that you know, women give birth to children, men give birth to devices or war. And yeah, okay. I mean, a lot of that's true. You know, there are many times when that's it seems to be true. Men have this fetish for making things, and the argument is that from Freud, the argument would be that they feel this terrible lack. That of course, his argument is going to be that women feel a terrible lack because they don't have a penis. I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think so. I haven't met any really women who wanted penises. They might want some of the power that the culture gives people with penises, but I don't think they actually want a penis. I mean, maybe you have to go into a dirty bathroom. You're like, oh, geez, I wish I had a penis for the moment, so I don't have to sit down. But anyway, to go on with this idea of people being born of an idea. You know, it's such a strange thing, but it's very modernist. And the person who I'm going to quote to you from is Dostoevsky. And in Notes from the Underground, which is this very unusual novella. Oh, everything Dostoevsky wrote was unusual. I mean, it was just brilliant. It's amazing stuff. And so in Notes from the Underground, Dostoevsky paints a picture of this person who is never named, who lives in a way which is despicable. I mean, he's not. This is not a nice person at all, but he's also a very canny observer of society and people around him. He clearly comes from either the upper middle class or the aristocracy in some way, enough that he doesn't have to work for a living, so that he's not troubled by the labor. He's not troubled by labor. He's not a laborer in any way. And most of Dostoevsky's people are not laborers. Some are, but most are not. Unlike Tolstoy, who had workers. I mean, people were, slaves. They were workers. Anyway, in the Underground, so the novella consists of really the person. He sort of describes his life, kind of, which is a very louche affair. I mean, he sort of abuses everybody that he comes across. He uses women, and he gets drunk, and he's a gambler, and he does all the sort of typical things that an aristocrat would do. But he's also a thinker, and this is sort of his curse, is that he doesn't just live his life. He also is cursed to think over much. So it's sort of like Hamlet in some ways, I guess. So he says at one point in the novella, towards the end of it, "Perhaps I turn out to be more alive than you. Look harder. After all, we don't even know where real life is lived nowadays." Now, this is 130 years old. So this is why it's like, this is modernity, then this is modernism. This is Russian modernism, as far as I'm concerned. "We don't even know where real life is lived nowadays, or what it is, what name it goes by. Leave us to ourselves without our books, and at once we get into a muddle and lose our way. We don't know whose side we are on, or where to give our allegiance, what to love and what to hate. We even find it difficult to be human beings, men with real flesh and blood, of our own. We are born dead, and we become more and more contented with our condition. We are acquiring a taste for it. Soon we shall invent a method of being born from an idea." And this is these moments exist in the same cultural awareness. What I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by QuickTime, thank you, Apple, was that the Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky, and in the late 19th century, and Trumbo's book exist, as far as I'm concerned, in the same cultural world, in the same understanding, in the same worldview. Despite the fact they're from different continents, they are informed. These two authors are informed by modernity and see in modernity the same kind of terrible losses that we have incurred, I guess. Okay. However, Joe was born of an idea, and he gives birth to himself. And on 138, he lay without nostrils and sniffed. He caught the smell of dew on grass, and he shivered because it was so delicious. So, here is the recreation of the world.